It's great to see you. Great to sort of meet you for the almost first time.
Yes, almost first time. Where are you located right now, just so I can orient myself?
I'm in Chicago. I'm on the south side of Chicago,
Great.
where I've been back here for about. I'm not originally from here, but I've been here for most of my adult life, and I've been back here since I started. Came back here in 2009.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and where are you?
I'm in Floyd, Virginia, which is kind of in rural Appalachia, the super western part of Virginia. Been here for 5 years, but grew up in Colorado and have lived all over Oregon, California, Massachusetts. So, but never thought I'd be here in Virginia, but I love it. Yep.
Yeah, I've been to some of the. I've been in Western Massachusetts and in Northern California as well. So some of those places I've been. I've been in a lot of places as well. So tell me what brought you to. I know that you're with Springhouse in
Yeah.
Virginia. I'm really interested in kind of like in that and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so Springhouse, we are an intergenerational learning community, and we are working on fundamentally transforming the purpose and practice of education. And it was Springhouse that really brought me out to Floyd. I had
Hmm.
actually 5 years ago come for their 8-month program for adults, and then ended up staying, getting a job, and kind of left my life in Oregon and really started to build a life in a community here in Floyd. And it really met my passion for culture change. And I kind of fell into education. I didn't really think education was going to be my thing, but as we'll talk about more, I'm sure it's just, I think education is like the linchpin of cultural renewal. And
Hmm.
I experienced it here, and really excited that TLF is kind of jumping on board with this education as transformation. And that's really why I found myself saying, I got to offer a class. And when Ba, reached out to me, it was like, yes, this is aligned. This is part of my vision as well. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that sort of resonates with me. Similarly, I was sort of a student of, I'm a writer and have a background in philosophy and religion, and was interested in kind of like really big questions and the course of kind of human civilization and our place in the world and on the planet, and thinking about some of the like major kind of shifts that are going on in the world, and the way that we as both individuals and kind of collectively uh, have these stories that we tell about who we are and our place in the world. And like you said, it's like that a large part of like the way that we are given our stories and the way we learn to reimagine our stories is through education. And
Yeah.
so, I came here back to Chicago. I'd lived here kind of in college and a little bit in my 20s. And then I sort of traveled all over the world and all over the United States, and came back here in 2009 and started the Chicago Wisdom Project, which is a nonprofit. And we worked with youth here on the South Side and of all different ages. And the idea was that we are trying to find a learning space where they could tell their stories and reimagine the stories they've been given about who they were and their place in the world. Which is like a way for like sort of like individual transformation, but also collective transformation. So same as you, I think when Bon and I have known each other for a few years now because we have sort of similar ideas about teaching and learning and education. And then, when he asked about the course, um, about teaching something, um, not even really knowing what it was, but I was really, I figured it felt like a perfect fit for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So tell me about your class. I'm interested in your class too. Kind of like, what are you
Right.
teaching exactly?
Well, I think that this was really, it was came out of my thesis work that I was doing with Antioch, and with really looking, I kind of once again fell into a master's. I wasn't really wanting to do a master's, but it just kept on calling to me. And this kind of seems to be the thing I keep learning from my own education is a transformation of myself with along with the community, right? And so, same way I kind of tumbled into education, it was like I didn't come to become a teacher in this position. I'm like, I came for my own self-discovery. and happened to be in an intergenerational setting. So then became a teacher and a mentor because of just being with others of different ages, right? We naturally fall into mentorship because someone who's in a different developmental stage, they're learning from me, and then I'm also learning from them. And so that's kind of what my becoming into an educator was like. And so my course really started to develop around what would that look like for those who want to become educators or who already are educators to go through a similar journey that kind of, it's changing the perspective, right? It's like we often come into, I'm going to use kind of old paradigm and new paradigm kind of language, but the kind of old paradigm of education being, I'm all knowing, I'm a teacher, I'm going to come in, I'm going to impart this wisdom upon you, versus I'm coming into this experience knowing that I'm going to be transformed. And just that alone, and to walk into a classroom with that perspective leads to more compassion,
Mhm.
emergence, openness. All of a sudden, we switch kind of that hierarchical thinking to we are all learners, we are all teachers. And that's really what I think is the key to transformation of education, too. And it has to start with the educators. So my course is really looking at who are you as an educator? What's your story? And we're going to be doing that through our own self-reflection, but also self-reflection collectively. So as a community, and then
Right.
doing embodied practices, creativity, and really asking ourselves, like, who am I as a teacher? Who am I as a learner? Who am I as a mentor? And try to kind of like use those questions as exploration into really like who we are as people, and then who we are when we show up into a classroom setting. So that's kind of the basic idea. I'm taking in a lot of embodiment practices, creativity, rites of passage, um, and really hoping to create also just a community within the class itself where we can all go on a transformative journey together. And that's kind of the basic concept, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I loved what you said. It's like, having worked with a lot of educators as well. I mean, a lot of the work I've done over the years with here in Chicago has sort of shifted from, kind of directly working with young people. Over in more recent years, I've done a lot more working with educators. And my intuition, which I think generally is true, is that teachers know they want to do things a little differently from the way they've been sort of shown in the classroom, but that the schools, the institutions, the system, and also just like the language we use about teaching and learning, about education, kind of gets in the way, and it's hard to like move out of the certain patterns of thinking that sort of our default ways of approaching things. And I think those are often reified in our classrooms in subtle ways. Even if we have like a
Oh,
great
sure.
curriculum, great ideas, but like, I talk a lot about the learning space and how it's shaped and how that influences the subtle lessons that are taught in the classroom as much as anything. And I think really like a lot of what you were saying, it really resonated because I think it's like the way I like to think about it is a shift from thinking of people as entering into learning
Mhm.
experiences as individuals to thinking about it as a more relational space and thinking about
Yeah.
the relationship as primary, right? Rather than the individuals as primary. And that's where you get that sort of dualism of teacher and student, or hierarchy of teacher and student, right? Is that way of thinking as like individuals who are somehow static, rather than teaching and learning. It happens at kind of like magical in between space, and it happens when you cultivate, and you said this when you're talking, this like, which I love, is like you're creating a sense of community in the space. And that's I've always found, right, if you're in any class that you're teaching, that if you can create a sense of community and care about for the people in there in this space, everything else is easier. You know what I mean? It's like
And
It's
who knows, right? I mean, who knows what's going
yeah,
to emerge in that in-between space to
you
create
don't know, right?
a
Yeah, yeah,
relationship and like, even just simple things that have been helpful for me where to ask questions for myself, like, how do I feel about conflict? How do I feel about disagreement? And if I'm not taking a moment to really discern that for myself and feeling into it, then I'm probably going to come in, I'm going to assume that whatever I think about conflict should then be extended upon the whole, community. And then that's going to really impact the emergence of different opinions. It might stagnate some potential learning that needs to happen. But with safety and relationship, like you're saying, it really allows for a whole different way of approaching learning in general. So absolutely. Yep.
yeah. And so like, and like for example, like I'll relate it to the course I'm teaching, which is called,
Yes.
it's on spiritual activism, right? And so, I think a lot of the time, when people think about uh activism, it's sort of thought of as like taking on or tackling kind of a particular issue, right, and dealing with the issue itself. And those things are important, and we can talk about those things. But I think what's really fundamental, it's particularly true, I think, with younger children. This is really, really true, but it's true with all different ages. It's true that I think that we can also teach how to engage the world by how we engage each other in the learning space. You know what I mean? And I like the intergenerational component you mentioned as well, because I think like that's really it's about relationship and how we learn from each other in community. You really emphasize that a lot, and that's great. So the idea when I talk about spiritual activism, it's how we're having an internal and an external transformation together, and how we can have a shift in how we think of our relationships with one another, with the broader world, as sort of a way to really begin to think differently and move differently in the world.
Mhm.
Um, that to things that are going on. We don't ignore what's happening in the world, but I think that really, really getting to the heart of that, and that's where education, I think, comes in. It's how we actually engage each other in our
Mhm.
learning spaces from all throughout our lives that facilitate that change. And I talk a lot about how it changes kind of the essential story we have about who we are, and that's for
Mhm.
me is fundamental to any transformative process.
Absolutely. Tell me more about kind of how you use storytelling and that the narratives of the stories we tell ourselves and others. Does that come into your course with spiritual activism?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, and it sort of varies, and when I teach in different contexts and depending on like one thing I've done, for example, as I begin with kind of like, this question of is examining the kind of broader stories we have about who we are in the world. One of the things I've done over the years a lot is I've taken a look at people's stories and ask the question, is this a story? Is this an asset narrative or a deficit narrative? In other words, is it telling you something about what your gifts are for the world or what's wrong with you fundamentally in the world? And it can be kind of the same story. And then one technique that I've used over the years, which is really kind of a creative process, is like taking a story and then thinking of ourselves rather than just as individuals. We can tell a story from the perspective of an individual, but think about it like sort of like if you can picture sort of concentric circles, like what's the story about me and my role and my agency and my story? But then what if we include our family or our community or the broader world, and how does that story look? And what that does is it gives us a sense of like all the different ways we're interconnected, all the different things and factors that happen to us. And we do have agency and responsibility, but also there are things that are far beyond our control in our story, and that lead us to this sort of place in the world, which is actually really healing and empowering in some cases, I think.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I've done, and will do with kind of the stories, about who we are. And there's all different ways to tell a story, of course. And I think just like raising our awareness about the subtle ways that a story is conveyed. Even in the way the words we use, the way we sit and arrange. One thing I do sometimes, and this is a little different because it's online, but like if I enter into a room and I look at how the chairs are arranged, you know what I mean? That sort of tells a story about who has power, right? And I think that the question of power is really important to explore and examine. So a few different ways.
That's so exciting. I can feel already it's like the similarities and the
Hmm.
kind of the ways that our courses complement each other too, because I think it's
Yeah, for sure.
it's I think a lot about spiritual activism as both it's not that it must start with myself, but not end with myself. And I'm curious
Hmm.
what you think of that, because it's like, I know that I often think of my job, even though I'm not like on the like front lines protesting, that by living a new way of being in the world, that there is some sort of direct action against kind of a different paradigm. But that also
Yeah.
means that my spiritual practice and who I am as a person is equally as important then, because then that means that I'm showing up day in and day out, as, in activism. And therefore, to
Yeah.
strengthen that, I need to have my own practices and really cultivate my own personhood to show up in the world. I'm curious what you think about that, but that's what's coming to mind when you speak of.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. I think, it's like part of it. I often think about this question of sort of like, direct action versus, kind of other ways to engage, like, or working with. Let me go like this: working within the system versus working with outside of the system, right? Like, I think that's like sometimes there's a tension there a little bit, and I think I kind of think of it as like we just have to sort of like see what our own gifts are, really. You know what I mean? Like where our passion is and where our gifts are. I don't think I think there's value in all those different approaches, and I'd also say like I think it's important. I think it's absolutely a both and
Yeah.
thing when it comes to sort of like your interior practice versus engaging the world. And I think one of the things that I like to do when we talk about, because I talk about this in the course description, the sort of like the way that there's been at times they've been the notion of like the spiritual life versus like the kind of like engagement in the world has been sort of like
Mhm.
there's been sort of a dualism between those two. And I'd like to, just as we think of like the self as opposed to the cosmos, I'd like to think of like or world. I'd like to think of those as that dichotomy as being is like breaking that dichotomy down a little bit. I think is part of the
Yes.
work in the class, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about like the work that you're doing, every day, for yourself, for your students, that's all part of the same work, I think. And thinking about how we can shift our way of thinking from that dichotomous way of thinking is really important.
Agreed. Right. That it's one and the same in all of the ways that we show up. And I love how you're using narrative to really explore that too, which is like the broader narratives we live in, and then our personal stories that we're telling ourselves and how they're interconnected. And also, you know, how do I show
Yeah,
up every day? That's great. I'll have to take
absolutely.
your
So
class. I'm really excited. I'd love to do it.
likewise, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm excited about the program, and excited to teach. Absolutely, and I think I'm sure you'll agree with this. I feel like I'll learn a lot from teaching in a new context. Like I always do. I always learn a lot from teaching. And what I love to engage kind of a new group of students from a different context, because every time, and that's I think really important when I think about this notion of like what the teaching and learning, what the educational process is. I think it is a relational thing, and I think something, as you put it very eloquently earlier, that something emerges in the process that you can't predict necessarily. So something it's different every time, and that's part of the beauty of it, I think, and the mystery of
Absolutely.
it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's one of my main things with curriculum planning whenever I teach is, you make plans and then God laughs or source laughs. It's
Yeah,
like what's actually needed in that moment. And I know whenever I enter into a space with intention, it's going to transform me too. And I really think um, I'm excited for that. It's going to be another learning opportunity for sure. Yep.
absolutely,
It was a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. And
absolutely, yeah. I'd love to connect more. We'll see what the future
agreed.
holds. Yeah.
Agreed.
Find out more about upcoming courses at our website, www.transformativedynamics.org.